Greetings, everyone. Ever felt that you were playing a game and did not know what exactly you should be doing? Then you are in luck. This course is dedicated to helping you understand chess, and with this newfound understanding, implementing it into your own games. Chess is an inherently strategic game. To achieve mastery of chess strategy, one must be able to assess and evaluate the current situation accurately. Based on the information gathered, create a plan to manipulate the board situation in their favor as the game progresses. The strategic master must not only be able to create a plan to achieve their aim, but be able to predict the opponent's aggressive and defensive responses to their strategies and plans. To understand and implement strategy, we must break down chess into its most basic components. The aim of chess is to checkmate. Everything else is secondary. Let's think of chess as two kingdoms where battle has been initiated. The two kingdoms, like any other, has flanks and a central position. At the beginning of the game, forces are spread across the kingdom, unprepared for either attack or defense. Each side aims to coordinate their forces to attack and defend, meanwhile not allowing the opponent to do the same. The classical opening principles are easily explained when one has a deep understanding of the previously stated generalities. Let's now put the principles into perspective. Understanding why we do what we do is key for strategic mastery. Develop towards the center. At the beginning of the game, the situation is unclear, so one must remain flexible. From the center, a piece can travel between sectors relatively quickly. If it becomes necessary to aid in the defense of another sector or join the rest of the army in the attack in another area of the board, central pieces will get there much faster than a piece that must start its journey from the wing. Before we progress, let's take a step back and ensure all participants have a firm understanding of the board and its sectors. The queen side runs from the A to the D file. Any piece located in the highlighted sector is said to be on the queen side. The reason for this is quite intuitive, as the queens either start on D1 or D8. Any pieces located in this highlighted sector are said to be on the king's side, as the kings either start on E1 or E8. Classically, the center of the board are considered to be the four highlighted squares, E4, E5, D4, and D5. But we will call this the small center or the immediate center, as there are more squares that are important in the central position. As the chess theoretical framework evolved, other squares not in the immediate center, but still important in the control of that immediate center and relatively close to the center, were given the classification as the big center. They are all the squares in the highlighted area. Let's take a look at this example that clearly shows how pieces in the center can move much faster between sectors in comparison to those on the flanks. The knight on d4 starts on what can be referred to as the center queenside sector. We refer to this as the center queenside sector as the d4 square not only is on the queen's side, but is a central square. This knight is very flexible. If we were attacking on the king's side and the knight was needed to participate in the attack, can easily get to the king's side in one move. The move knight f5. If it had to participate on the king's side defense, it can easily retreat to the king's side with the move knight f3. If it needed to assist on the queen's side, it has multiple squares it can reach further across to the queen's side with. Now let's compare it with a counterpart on the same rank and file, but further away from the center, on the absolute flank of the board, on the queen's side's flank. If this knight is needed for the defense on the king's side, it will take at least 2 moves to get there. If it's needed for the defense of the center, it will take at least 2 moves to be placed in the center. This example clearly illustrates the difference in flexibility between the two knights. In the center, a piece controls the maximum amount of squares. Placed on the flank, it may control less squares, and in general, less important squares. Central squares are most important as they connect the sectors and act as rules for the pieces to travel between sectors. This point is very important, as we will see. Let's take a look at the start position of the chessboard. The chessboard at the very start of the game has 32 pieces in total and only 64 squares, and the board itself only has 64 squares in total. What does this mean for us? This means that there are only 32 squares left for all of our pieces. From the very start of the game, half of the board is already occupied. In the center, a piece controls the maximum amount of squares. Placed on the flank, it may control less squares, and in general, less important squares. Central squares are most important as they connect the sectors and act as rules for the pieces to travel between sectors. This point is very important, as we will see. Let's take a look at the start position of the chessboard. The chessboard at the very start of the game has 32 pieces in total and only 64 squares, and the board itself only has 64 squares in total. What does this mean for us? This means that there are only 32 squares left for all of our pieces. From the very start of the game, half of the board is already occupied. In the center, pieces restrict other pieces from the use of the central squares, therefore breaking the coordination between sectors. Let's take a look at this example. Here, white controls the center very well. He places 2 pawns in the center of the board, e4 and d4. He takes control of squares on the black's half of the board. To be clear, black's half of the board stems from the 8th rank to the 5th rank, and white's from the 1st rank to the 4th rank. This mighty pawn duel takes away many of the squares from the black knights. Let's take a deeper look at the position. The knight on f6, if it wanted to get to the queen's side, has no viable way of getting the queen's side. If it tries to go through the d5 square, then the pawn will capture it. It can't take the pawn on e4 as it is defended by the knight on c3. The knight on c6 is on the queen side. If it wanted to go to the king side, it would not be able to use the e5 square, as the d4 pawn guards it very well. We can easily see that white's control of the center breaks the coordination between the two flanks. The second principle we will analyze is fight for the center. Fight for the center is just a continuation of the previous principle. It simply means attempt to dominate the central squares or undermine your opponent's control of the central squares. If your opponent has no control in the center, your pieces can maneuver easily as necessary. If you control the squares in the center, your opponent's pieces will not be able to maneuver freely. Here's a classical opening, the Italian game. The line white has chosen to implement is called the Gekko Piano. One of the main ideas of the Gekko is to undermine black's control in the center. White will attempt to play d4, attacking the e5 pawn, which influences the center of the board. This position may arise. Here, white's two pawns, e4 and d4, control many squares in the center. The pawn on d4 also helps to reduce the scope of black's bishop, as it impedes the path of the bishop. Don't make too many pawn moves. Don't bring your queen out too early. Don't move the same piece twice. Speak merely to not wasting time in the opening. This is easily understood. Both players are trying to achieve coordination. If one side coordinates faster than the other, the side that is ahead should use this advantage to attack, because the defense will be lacking. There is a failure to coordinate before an attack is launched. An important point to note, chess is a time-based game where each side only has one move. In chess, as in life, what you choose to do with your time will determine what becomes of you. Too many pawn moves not only refers to time, but the fact that pawns cannot move backward. Every time a pawn moves forward, it leaves squares and lines available for not only you to use, but your opponent to use. Let's think of the pawns as the wall that guard us. Similarly, we don't want holes in our walls for intruders to get in. We don't want to have holes or direct paths for our opponent's pieces to get into our position. This is a classic example of what happens when you bring out your queen too early. Queen takes. Now the queen is out that move too. White uses this fact to attack the queen. Now he is gaining time to develop and coordinate his pieces. The queen must move again, as she's the most valuable piece. Bishop e2, white is still developing. Meanwhile, black is using the time to just move one single piece, the queen. He will indeed be behind in development in the long run. Knight f3. White does not waste any time defending the pawn, as white understands that the main aim of the opening is to coordinate. And black's strategy here is incorrect, as black will have no time for the defense. if white manages to develop. Queen takes g2, rook g1. Now the rook has become activated. If we take stock of the position, white has developed 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces thus far, and black has just made queen moves. Queen h3, yet another queen move. d4, controlling the central squares and preparing development. e6, a pawn move, but it prepares development. Rook g3, hitting the queen, activating the rook. Queen h5. The queen is still vulnerable to attack, and white uses this fact. Rook g5, forcing the queen into a worse position. Rook e5, hitting the queen diagonally. Thus far, black has only made queen moves. Knight g5. Now white has a big advantage in development. Therefore, his forces must be coordinated to prove his advantage. Queen f6, knight d5. Knight d5 hits the queen again and brings the knight closer to black's territory, where it will control more squares on the black's half. And also threatening knight takes c7. Queen d8, bishop h5, now targeting the weakest point on the chessboard. f7 is the weakest point generally at the beginning of the game because it's only defended by the king. g6, another pawn move. Queen f3, ignoring the threat against the bishop, threatening Pt1 on f7. f5, trying to prevent the mate. Queen takes f5, the queen cannot be taken as white is in many pins. The e pawn is pinned to the king along the e file. The g pawn is pinned along the diagonal h5 d8. Knight h6, bishop takes g6, and black throwing the towel here as after h takes g6, queen takes g6, the king can go to d7, but queen takes e6 is made in 1. Or in the variation knight f7, queen takes f7 is made. This clearly illustrates white gaining time off of the black's queen because black was deflected by trying to gain pawns and simply just wasting time moving the queen around. If we take a look at the final position, black's whole queen side is undeveloped. Meanwhile, white has developed majority of the pieces, and most of white's pieces are coordinating against the black king. This game illustrates another problem with the early excursion of the queen. This is a well-known trap in the Scandinavian defense. The queen yet again has been developed early. Knight c3, taking advantage of the queen's early development and controlling many squares. Queen a5. The queen moves to the edge of the board, where it would have limited mobility. d4, controlling the center. Black in this game manages to develop some pieces. Bishop d2. Now the queen is exposed along the a5 e1 diagonal, so white creates an X-ray against the queen, as the queen is targeted. As the queen is out early, white aims his minor pieces at the queen to gain tempo for development. Tempo in chess is time. When we say gain tempo, we mean we attack, not giving our opponent the opportunity to make a constructive move, as they must defend against our threat. Knight c6, black develops another piece. Bishop b5, a key move in this variation. The idea is black's queen is offside. It's to the very edge of the board where it has limited mobility. The bishop on b5 cuts the queen's line to the center and to the king side. Bishop d7, a fatal mistake, attempting to break the pin on the knight on c6. Knight d5, a brilliant move, using the fact that queen is exposed along the diagonal, and many of the squares are not accessible to the black's queen because white, while developing, control many squares. The bishop developed to b5, now guards a4 and a6, the knight and the bishop guards b4, the knight on d5 guards b6, and the rest of the white army guards all the other squares the queen can move to. The only move in the position is queen takes b5, but this loses tactically to the fork on c7. The queen so unfortunately placed. This is why her development should be delayed till we are sure where we want to put the queen. She's not in harm's way. Castle early. We want to castle early to accomplish two goals: get the king to safety and to mobilize the rook in the center of the board. The king in any war does not stand in the middle of the battleground. It is usually tucked away and protected. If the king is left in the center too long, the opponent will try to keep it there, since all the pieces from both flanks are going to gather in the center to do battle. It is best not to have the king in the center during the opening and the middle game, but in the end game, there are less forces that can coordinate against the king, so it may look for gainful employment in the center during the endgame stage. Let's take a look at a classic game where black's king is caught in the center. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. Following normal development, bishop c4, so everyone is keeping pace at this point. b4. This opening is called the Evans Gambit. White sacrifices a pawn to gain the center of the board. c3, bishop c5, so c3 gained a tempo. White was able to play c3, taking control over the d4 square, actually preparing d4. And black was not able to make any useful move, helping his development. The bishop had to go back to c5, where it will be a target when d4 comes. Castle, white manages to get his king out of the center very quickly. In comparison, black's king is at least a move or two away from going short. D6. Black does not hurry to castle, and he pays the price. D4. Taking control in the center and gaining time. E takes D, C takes D, bishop B6. Now white has a mobile pawn center. The E pawn is gone, and white's pawns are able to move forward. And black's king is stuck in the center. Rook E1. Now the rook eyeballs the king on the E file. Bishop G4. This is a solid developing move, but this developing move does not help black to get his king out of the center. Bishop B2, Queen F6. Still, black neglects to get the king out of the center. E5, the correct strategy. When the king is stuck in the center, you open the center, as your pieces will now be able to use the lines to target the black king. E takes D, and now lines are open against that white may enter the position. The D file is open. This diagonal is of some use. The bishop is looking. Pieces will soon join the attack. Queen F4. Not helping the development, but the queen was under attack. E6. Ripping the final defense from around white's king. Bishop takes F3. Thinking he's gaining some time on the queen, but white wastes no time in recapturing the bishop. Gives a check. Now the lines are open. This king is exposed. King F8 is forced. Everything is coming with time and the coordination. The king is exposed along the diagonal. The bishop takes aim against the king. Knight E7. Bishop takes E7. And the game is over. This black king is cut to shreds. One variation might go king E8. Bishop H4 check. And now, where can this king go? The king can't leave, so bishop E3. Blocking the line. Best here is not even, it's just not even to take the bishop, but queen D3. And this king is not long for this world. Let's follow the variation. Queen takes H4. Rook takes E3. Queen E7. And we could stop here as white is up significant material with mate to follow. Why did everything go so wrong for black? Let's go back. Here, white gambits a pawn. C3, bishop C5, castle. D6, just guarding the center. A fine move. D4, bishop B6 was best, not giving up the center. So this was a very small inaccuracy, allowing a mobile pawn front by white. This was a very big mistake. Queen F6. Yeah, white is well prepared in the center. Black is attempting to go along with the king, but going queen's side takes extra moves to prepare. Black should have instead just castled the king on the king's side. E5, opening the center. And here, the lines open. And in this position, the game is already over. this king will not survive without significant loss of material. Connect your rooks. Connect your rooks. Why is connecting the rooks important? In the clash of battle, pawns are usually exchanged. The exchange of pawns create open files, which the rooks can use as entry lines to penetrate into the position, to attack targets. If the rooks are not connected, they can't help each other to fight opposition along the open files. In this example, white's rooks are connected. There are no pieces between the two rooks. The two rooks are each other. On the other hand, the black's position, the rooks are disconnected. The king sits in the middle of the two rooks. White owns the d file, one of the two only files in the position. Black cannot fight white's control over the d file, and white will like to enter onto the square d7, where it would target black's pawns. According to Nimzovich, the goal of every operation on an open file is the eventual penetration into the enemy's position on the 7th or the 8th rank. White has a big advantage as the rook cannot be stopped from going to d7. Here, the situation is different. The rooks are connected, and now black can contest white's control over the d file. The position is now roughly equal. This video should have provided you with a deep understanding of chess strategy in general, and also of the classical opening principles and why they are important to follow. You should also have learned how to punish opponents who break these principles. In my future videos, I will dive deep into chess understanding that someday soon you will become a master strategist.